Good evening. Tonight, we're diving into what many experts are calling the most dangerous moment in global security since the Cold War. The last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia, the New START agreement, is set to expire this Thursday. This isn't just another diplomatic footnote. It's the final thread holding back a potential new arms race, one that could see the world's two largest nuclear powers building up their arsenals without any limits or oversight for the first time in decades. I'm your host, and over the next 12 minutes, we'll unpack the history, the high stakes politics, and the terrifying implications of what happens when the rules disappear. We'll hear from multiple perspectives, those who see this as a necessary reset, and those who view it as a catastrophic failure of diplomacy. Let's begin with the treaty itself. Signed in 2010 by Presidents Barack Obama and Dmitry Medvedev, the New START treaty was hailed as a cornerstone of strategic stability. Its core function was remarkably simple but profoundly important: to limit the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads each country could field. The magic number was 1,550. That's 1,550 warheads, each with the destructive power dwarfing the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Beyond that cap, the treaty established a system of verification and transparency. It allowed for on-site inspections, data exchanges, and notifications about the status of each nation's nuclear forces. This wasn't about trust, it was about creating predictability in a realm where miscalculation could mean the end of civilization. For 13 years, this framework has held, even as relations between Washington and Moscow deteriorated. But now, that framework is about to vanish. To understand why this is happening, we need to look at the political landscape in both capitals. In Moscow, President Vladimir Putin suspended Russia's participation in the treaty back in February of 2023, citing what he called the West's direct involvement in the war in Ukraine. He accused the United States of undermining Russia's security and stated that Moscow would no longer allow inspections of its nuclear sites. Crucially, however, Russia said it would continue to observe the treaty's central limits on warhead numbers. That suspension, however, was a clear precursor to the full expiration we now face. In Washington, the situation is complex. The Biden administration has repeatedly stated its willingness to engage in talks to negotiate a follow-on agreement. However, officials argue that Russia's suspension and its invasion of Ukraine have made meaningful dialogue impossible. There's also a domestic political dimension. Any new treaty would require ratification by the U.S. Senate, a body that has become increasingly polarized. With a two-thirds majority needed, the political appetite for a new arms control pact with an adversary like Russia is virtually non-existent. This brings us to the core of the debate. Is letting New START expire a strategic necessity or a historic blunder? Let's first hear the perspective of those who argue it's time for a new paradigm. Proponents of this view, often found in hawkish think tanks and certain political circles, argue that the old treaties are outdated. They point out that New START only covers so-called strategic or long-range nuclear weapons. It does not cover the vast arsenals of tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons, where Russia is believed to hold a significant numerical advantage, estimated at nearly 2,000 warheads compared to a few hundred for the United States. Furthermore, they argue, the treaty doesn't address new technologies like hypersonic glide vehicles, cyber warfare capabilities that could target nuclear command systems, or the nuclear ambitions of China, which is rapidly expanding its own arsenal. From this viewpoint, clinging to an old treaty gives a false sense of security while allowing adversaries to gain advantages in unregulated areas. They advocate for a broader, more modern framework, or failing that, the freedom for the U.S. to build up its forces to counter emerging threats without constraint. Now, let's contrast that with the overwhelming consensus of the arms control community and many military strategists, who view the expiration as an unmitigated disaster. Their fear is not of an immediate nuclear exchange, but of a slow, steady, and incredibly dangerous slide into a new arms race. Without the treaty's caps, there is nothing legally stopping either side from deploying more warheads. More importantly, without the verification regime, both sides will be operating in the dark. Imagine two rivals in a pitch-black room, each convinced the other is reaching for a weapon. That's the kind of instability that leads to catastrophic miscalculation. The data exchange and inspection protocols were designed precisely to prevent that. They provided concrete facts to replace fearful assumptions. When you know exactly how many delivery systems your adversary has, and you can verify it, you don't need to plan for the worst-case scenario of thousands of hidden weapons. You can base your defense posture on reality. That reality is now gone. Let's look at some numbers to understand the scale of what's at stake. According to the latest data exchanged under the treaty before Russia's suspension, the United States had 1,419 deployed strategic warheads. Russia reported 1,499. Both were comfortably under the 1,550 limit. But these are just the deployed strategic warheads. The total stockpiles, including reserves and non-strategic weapons, are much larger. The Federation of American Scientists estimates the U.S. total stockpile at about 5,244 warheads. Russia's is estimated at 5,889. These are the arsenals that could now grow unchecked. The expiration also comes at a time of heightened rhetoric. President Putin has repeatedly made veiled nuclear threats throughout the Ukraine conflict, placing his forces on special combat readiness and announcing the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. In the United States, the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review committed to modernizing the entire nuclear triad, land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and strategic bombers, at a cost projected to exceed $1.5 trillion over 30 years. Without a treaty, this modernization is no longer a replacement program. It becomes a potential expansion program. So what happens next? The most likely immediate scenario is a period of strategic ambiguity. Both sides may unofficially observe the old limits for a time, but the lack of verification means neither will trust the other to do so. This creates a classic security dilemma. Any move by one side, even if defensive, will be perceived as aggressive by the other, potentially triggering a response. For example, if the U.S. conducts a routine test of a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile, Russia, without inspection rights, might suspect it's testing a new multiple warhead capability. This could lead Moscow to accelerate its own programs. The cycle feeds on itself. Beyond the bilateral US-Russia dynamic, there's the China factor. China's nuclear arsenal, while significantly smaller, is growing rapidly. The Pentagon estimates it could grow to about 1,500 warheads by 2035. The US has repeatedly called for China to join arms control talks, but Beijing has refused, stating its arsenal is much smaller and intended only for minimum deterrence. With New START gone, the U.S. argument that it needs to counter both Russia and China simultaneously becomes much stronger, potentially justifying a significant buildup. This, in turn, could push China to build even faster, creating a three-way arms race. The ripple effects extend to America's allies in Europe and Asia, who rely on the U.S. nuclear umbrella for their security. They will be watching nervously, uncertain if the foundation of that security, strategic stability between the superpowers, is crumbling. Some, like the United Kingdom and France with their own smaller nuclear forces, may feel pressure to reassess their deterrent postures. For non-nuclear states, the expiration is a devastating blow to the entire nuclear non-proliferation treaty regime. The NPT is built on a bargain: non-nuclear states forgo weapons, while nuclear states work toward disarmament. Letting the last major disarmament treaty die sends a message that the nuclear powers are moving in the opposite direction, toward more weapons, not fewer. This undermines global efforts to prevent countries like Iran or North Korea from pursuing their own nuclear capabilities. Why should they show restraint if the established powers are abandoning restraint themselves? Is there any hope for a last-minute deal or a temporary extension? Most analysts say it's highly unlikely before Thursday's deadline. The gulf between Washington and Moscow is simply too wide, poisoned by the war in Ukraine. The best-case scenario, according to diplomats, is an informal, reciprocal commitment to maintain the existing limits, perhaps accompanied by a resumption of basic data exchanges at a technical level. But without the binding legal force of a treaty, such arrangements are fragile and politically reversible. The worst-case scenario is a rapid, tit-for-tat escalation in deployments and rhetoric, leading the world back to a level of nuclear danger not seen since the 1980s. In conclusion, the expiration of New START is more than a diplomatic failure. It is the removal of the guardrails on the most dangerous road in the world. For over 50 years, through crises and confrontations, arms control treaties provided rules, limits, and most importantly, clarity. They turned the abstract horror of mutual assured destruction into a managed, if terrifying, equilibrium. As of this Thursday, that management system goes offline. We are entering an era of unconstrained nuclear competition, driven by fear, mistrust, and new technologies. The experts we spoke to all agreed on one thing: the risk of a catastrophic mistake has just gone up. The question now is whether political leaders in Washington, Moscow, and beyond recognize the precipice they're approaching and have the wisdom to step back. The world holds its breath. This has been a Kenya News Update Today deep dive. Subscribe to Kenya News Update Today for more in-depth analysis of the stories shaping our world.